Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. In this episode, Ekundayo's journey takes a terrifying and heart-wrenching turn. Determined to finally banish the shadow within him, he embarks on one last battle, confronting the deepest darkness of his own soul. But what begins as a fight for redemption soon reveals the true, insidious nature of the shadow, and Ekundayo finds himself facing a twisted, haunting reflection of himself that refuses to be vanquished. Just when the village begins to feel safe, a chilling truth emerges: the darkness has returned, and it's more dangerous than ever. Strange whispers, ghostly visions, and a horrifying encounter with someone familiar yet transformed leave the villagers, and Ekundayo's mother, terrified and desperate. The battle is far from over, and the true cost of Ekundayo's sacrifice comes to light, threatening to consume everything he fought to protect. The following day, Ekundayo prepared himself for the battle he knew he had to face. He spent the morning meditating, focusing on the strength he had gained from his previous battles. He thought of his mother, Baba Adisa, and the villagers who depended on him. He could not afford to let the shadow win. Baba Adisa joined him in the afternoon, bringing with him a small bundle of herbs and a flask of sacred water. "This will help you in your journey," the elder said, handing the items to Ekundayo. "But remember, the true battle will be fought within your mind. The shadow cannot be defeated by force alone. You must confront the fear and doubt that it feeds on." Ekundayo nodded, accepting the herbs and water. "I understand. I'm ready." Baba Adisa smiled, a look of pride in his eyes. "I believe in you, Ekundayo. You have already shown great strength, and I have no doubt that you will succeed." As the sun began to set, Ekundayo made his way to the edge of the village, where the forest loomed dark and foreboding. He knew that the shadow had taken root in his mind, but he also felt that the forest was where he needed to go to confront it. The place where his journey had begun would also be where it ended. He entered the forest, the familiar sounds of rustling leaves and distant animal calls greeting him. The shadows around him seemed to shift and move, but this time, he didn't feel the same fear as before. He was determined to face whatever lay ahead. As he walked deeper into the forest, the shadows grew darker, more oppressive. The air grew colder, and the whispers he had heard in the village returned, louder and more insistent. "Ekundayo, you cannot escape me." The voice echoed through the trees, chilling and familiar. Ekundayo felt the cold presence closing in around him, but he didn't stop. He continued forward, his steps sure and steady. Finally, he reached a small clearing, the same place where he had first encountered the shadow all those weeks ago. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows in the clearing seemed to pulse with a life of their own. "You have come to face me again," the shadow's voice said, its tone dripping with malice. "But this time, you are alone. There is no one to help you, no one to save you. You are mine, Ekundayo." Ekundayo stepped into the center of the clearing, the herbs and flask of sacred water in his hands. "I am not alone," he said, his voice steady. "I have the strength of my family, my village, and myself. You cannot control me." The shadows in the clearing shifted, forming a dark, menacing shape, the same towering figure that had confronted him in the void. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its form seemed to ripple with power. "You are nothing without me," the shadow hissed, its voice echoing through the clearing. "You cannot defeat me. You cannot. But Ekundayo didn't let the shadow finish. He threw the herbs into the air, chanting the words Baba Adisa had taught him. The herbs ignited, filling the clearing with a bright, purifying light that pushed back the shadows. The shadow screamed in fury, its form flickering as the light cut through it. But it didn't retreat, it surged forward, its eyes burning with hatred. Ekundayo stood his ground, holding the flask of sacred water in front of him. You will not take me, he said, his voice filled with resolve. I banish you from my mind, from my life, forever. With those words, he uncorked the flask and threw the water into the air. The water sparkled in the light, falling like rain over the clearing. As it touched the shadow, the darkness recoiled, its form dissolving into nothingness. The shadow let out one final, piercing scream before it vanished, leaving the clearing bathed in light. The oppressive weight lifted, and the air grew warm once more. Ekundayo stood alone in the clearing, the silence almost deafening after the battle. He had done it, he had confronted the shadow within himself and banished it from his mind. The oppressive presence that had haunted him for so long was finally gone, and the forest around him seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. But as he began to leave the clearing, a deep sense of unease settled over him. Something wasn't right. The air was still too quiet, too heavy. Ekundayo couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't truly over, that the shadow had one final trick up its sleeve. As he stepped back into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around him, their branches twisting into sinister shapes. The shadows at the edge of his vision moved unnaturally, and the sense of dread that had faded now returned with full force. Suddenly, the ground beneath Ekundayo's feet began to tremble. He staggered, trying to keep his balance as the earth cracked and split open in front of him. From the fissure, a dark mist began to rise, swirling around him with an otherworldly chill. Before he could react, the mist solidified, forming a familiar figure, one that filled Ekundayo with terror. It was the shadow, but this time, it was not just a reflection of his fears. It had taken on a new form, one that was disturbingly human. The figure was tall and imposing, dressed in the traditional garb of the village, but its eyes were empty voids, and its face was a twisted mockery of Ekundayo's own. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. The shadow had not been fully banished, it had taken on a new identity, one that was far more dangerous. Did you think it would be that easy? The figure said, its voice a chilling echo of Ekundayo's own. You thought you could simply cast me aside? I am not just a part of you, I am you. I am everything you fear, everything you hate. And now, I am free. The shadow had taken on Ekundayo's form, twisting it into something monstrous. It was no longer just a shadowy presence in his mind, it was a living, breathing entity, one that had been born from his own darkness. And now it stood before him, fully formed, and fully intent on destroying everything he had fought to protect. Ekundayo backed away, his heart pounding with fear. This can't be real, he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. I defeated you. You're gone. The shadow grinned, a cold and cruel smile. You may have pushed me back, but you can never truly be rid of me. I am the darkness within you, Ekundayo. I am your shadow, and I have grown stronger because of you. The figure advanced, its movements fluid and menacing. You think you've won, but the truth is, you've only made me stronger. Every fear, every doubt you have fed me, and now I am more powerful than ever. Ekundayo knew he had to fight, but the sheer terror of facing this twisted version of himself paralyzed him. The shadow was right, it had fed on his fears and doubts, growing stronger with every moment he had tried to suppress it. Now, it was too powerful, too real. As the shadow closed in, Ekundayo realized with horror that he had no more weapons, no more spells to protect himself. The herbs and sacred water had been used up, and the ceremonial dagger lay broken on the ground. He was defenseless. The shadow reached out, its hand a mass of darkness that seemed to swallow the light around it. Now, Ekundayo, it whispered, you will become one with the darkness. You will join me, and together, we will destroy everything you have ever loved. Ekundayo's mind raced, searching for a way out, but there was none. The shadow had trapped him, and there was no escaping it. It was as if all his efforts had only led to this final, inevitable moment, his own destruction by the very darkness he had tried to conquer. Just as the shadow's hand was about to touch him, a sharp, blinding pain shot through Ekundayo's chest. He gasped, doubling over as the pain intensified, radiating through his entire body. It felt as if his heart was being ripped from his chest, as if the darkness was tearing him apart from the inside. The shadow laughed, a sound that echoed with pure malevolence. Do you feel that, Ekundayo? That is your true self emerging, the part of you that you have tried so hard to deny. It is time to accept what you really are. The pain grew worse, and Ekundayo fell to his knees, clutching his chest. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he saw himself in the shadow's eyes, a reflection of the darkness within him, the side of himself he had always feared. But as he lay there, on the brink of giving in, a new thought pierced through the darkness, and a memory of his mother, of the love and strength she had always given him. He remembered Baba Adisa's words, the belief that he had the power to choose his own path, to define himself not by his fears, but by his courage. Summoning the last of his strength, Ekundayo forced himself to stand, staring into the shadow's eyes. You are not me, he said, his voice trembling but resolute. You are a part of me, yes, but you do not define me. I am more than my fears, more than my darkness. The shadow recoiled slightly, its grin faltering. What are you doing? You cannot. But Ekundayo didn't let it finish. He took a step forward, his heart still aching with pain, but his resolve stronger than ever. You cannot control me. I choose my own path. I choose the light. With those words, Ekundayo reached deep within himself, tapping into the strength he had discovered through his journey. The pain in his chest intensified, but this time, he didn't let it overwhelm him. He used it, channeled it into a force of pure will, pushing back against the darkness that threatened to consume him. The shadow screamed, its form flickering and wavering as Ekundayo's light grew stronger. The darkness around it began to crack, fragments breaking away and dissolving into the air. No, the shadow cried, its voice filled with desperation. You cannot do this. I am you. I am. But it was too late. With one final burst of light, Ekundayo banished the shadow, its form shattering into a million pieces and disappearing into the night. The clearing fell silent, the air warm and still once more. Ekundayo stood alone, his body trembling from the effort, but the darkness was gone. The shadow had been defeated, not just by his strength, but by his acceptance of who he was. He had faced the darkest part of himself and emerged victorious. As the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, Ekundayo felt the warmth of the sun on his face, a welcome relief after the cold and darkness he had endured. The forest, which had been shrouded in shadow, now seemed alive with light and life. Birds chirped in the trees, and the scent of fresh earth filled the air. He was exhausted, his body aching from the battle he had just fought, but there was a sense of peace that filled him, a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. The shadow was gone, truly gone this time, and with it, the fear and doubt that had plagued him for so long. But as he began to walk back toward the village, Ekundayo knew that this peace came at a cost. The battle had taken its toll, not just on him, but on the village and the people he loved. There would be healing, yes, but there would also be scars that would take time to fade. When Ekundayo reached the village, he was greeted by the sight of his mother waiting for him at the edge of the forest. Abini's face lit up with relief and joy as she saw her son approach, and she rushed forward to embrace him. Ekundayo, she whispered, holding him tightly. You're safe. He hugged her back, the warmth of her embrace filling him with a sense of belonging he had feared he might never feel again. I am a mother, he replied, his voice filled with emotion. It's over. The shadow is gone. Akanni pulled back slightly, searching his eyes for the truth. When she saw the light in them, she smiled, her own eyes glistening with tears. "You've done it, my son. You've saved us all." Ekundayo looked around at the village, the place he had fought so hard to protect. The villagers were slowly emerging from their huts, their faces cautious but hopeful as they watched mother and son reunite. The darkness that had once threatened to consume them was gone, and in its place was a sense of hope and renewal. But even as they celebrated their victory, Ekundayo knew that there was still much to do. The shadow may have been banished, but its influence had left deep wounds that would take time to heal. The village had been through a terrible ordeal, and the memories of that darkness would not fade easily. Baba Adisa approached, his expression one of quiet pride. "You have done well, Ekundayo," he said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "But as you know, the scars left by the shadow will not heal overnight. We must be vigilant, and we must help each other to rebuild and restore what has been lost." Ekundayo nodded, feeling the weight of Baba Adisa's words. "I understand," he said softly. "This isn't the end, it's just the beginning of something new." The elder smiled, the glint of wisdom in his eyes. "Indeed, it is. The village will need your strength and courage as we move forward. You have proven that you are more than just a boy, you are a leader, someone who can guide us through even the darkest of times." The words filled Ekundayo with a deep sense of responsibility. He had faced the darkness within himself and won, but now he needed to help his village heal from the trauma they had all endured. There was still so much to do, so many wounds to mend. As the villagers gathered around, Ekundayo noticed something strange. There was a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the morning light. The figure was tall, cloaked in shadow, its face hidden in the darkness. A chill ran down Ekundayo's spine. The shadow had been defeated, he was sure of it. But as he stared at the figure, a deep sense of foreboding filled him. This wasn't the same shadow he had fought, this was something else, something older and far more sinister. Before Ekundayo could react, the figure stepped into the light, revealing a face that was all too familiar. It was Baba Adisa, but his eyes were wrong. They were dark, void-like, and they seemed to swallow all the light around them. "Baba Adisa," Ekundayo whispered, his voice trembling with confusion and fear. The elder smiled, but it was a cold, twisted smile that sent shivers through Ekundayo. "You did well, Ekundayo," the elder said, his voice laced with something dark and malevolent. "You truly are a brave and strong young man." Ekundayo's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that something was terribly wrong. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The elder's smile widened, and the shadows around him seemed to grow darker, more oppressive. "Did you really think you could defeat the shadow so easily? Did you think the darkness was something that could simply be banished with light and willpower?" Ekundayo stepped back, his mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Baba Adisa had been the one guiding him, helping him through the darkness. But now, as he looked into the elder's eyes, he saw something terrifying, something that had been hidden all along. "The shadow is not just a part of you, Ekundayo," Baba Adisa continued, his voice smooth and dangerous. "It is a part of all of us. It is the darkness in every heart, the fears and doubts that we bury deep inside. And it cannot be destroyed." Ekundayo felt a cold wave of dread wash over him. "No, this can't be true," he whispered, his voice trembling. Baba Adisa's form began to shift, the shadows around him swirling like a dark vortex. "You fought bravely, Ekundayo," he said, his voice deepening into something unnatural. "But you were never meant to defeat the shadow. You were meant to become it." With those words, the elder's form melted away, revealing the true entity behind the darkness, a monstrous figure, ancient and terrifying, with eyes that gleamed with a hunger for souls. It was a being of pure malevolence, something far older and darker than the shadow Ekundayo had fought. Ekundayo staggered back, his heart pounding with terror. No, no, this isn't real. The creature laughed, the sound that echoed through the village like a death knell. Oh, it is very real, Ekundayo. The shadow was just a test, a way to prepare you for what was to come. And now, you will fulfill your destiny. The villagers, who had been standing by, watching in confusion, now began to scream and scatter in terror as the creature's presence became more apparent. The air around them grew thick with darkness, and the once warm sunlight was swallowed by a deep, unnatural night. Akanni reached for Ekundayo, her eyes wide with fear. Ekundayo, what is happening? But before he could answer, the creature lunged forward, its dark tendrils wrapping around Akanni, pulling her away from her son. She screamed, a sound filled with pure terror, as the darkness began to consume her. No! Ekundayo shouted, rushing toward her. But the darkness around the creature was too powerful, too overwhelming. It was as if the entire village was being swallowed by an abyss. You cannot stop this, Ekundayo, the creature hissed, its voice filled with dark glee. You were always destined to become one with the darkness. It is in your blood, in your very soul. Ekundayo's mind raced, desperate for a way to fight back, but he felt utterly powerless against this ancient evil. He had thought he had conquered the shadow, but this was something far worse, something he had never been prepared for. The creature's tendrils tightened around Akanni, and her screams grew weaker, her life force being drained away by the darkness. Ekundayo's heart broke as he realized he couldn't save her, that everything he had fought for was crumbling before his eyes. No. I won't let this happen. Ekundayo shouted, his voice raw with emotion. He reached deep within himself, searching for the strength that had seen him through so many trials. But as he tried to summon the light, he found only darkness, a deep, consuming void that threatened to swallow him whole. The creature laughed again, a sound that shook the very earth beneath them. Your light is gone, Ekundayo. You have nothing left. The darkness is all that remains. As the last of the light faded from the village, Ekundayo felt himself slipping into despair. The creature's words echoed in his mind, a cruel reminder that no matter how hard he fought, he could never escape the darkness within him. But just as the last of his hope seemed to die, Ekundayo felt a faint warmth in his chest, a small, flickering flame that refused to be extinguished. It was the same flame that had guided him through his battles, the same light that had driven him to protect his mother and his village. No, Ekundayo whispered, his voice filled with a quiet determination. I will not let you take her. I will not let you win. The creature's laughter faltered as Ekundayo's light began to grow, burning away the darkness that had surrounded him. The flame within him grew brighter, fueled by his love for his mother, his village, and the life he had fought so hard to protect. With a cry of pure will, Ekundayo unleashed the full power of his light, a brilliant explosion that lit up the night like a supernova. The creature screamed in agony as the light tore through it, its dark form disintegrating under the onslaught of Ekundayo's power. But as the creature faded, Ekundayo felt a terrible truth settle over him. This victory came at a great cost. The light that had saved him was consuming him as well, burning away the last remnants of the darkness within him, but also taking a part of him with it. The light dimmed, and Ekundayo fell to the ground, his strength utterly spent. The creature was gone, the village once again bathed in the soft glow of dawn, but Ekundayo knew he was not the same. The battle had taken a piece of his soul, a piece that he would never regain. His mother, now freed from the creature's grasp, rushed to his side, cradling him in her arms. Ekundayo, my son, please stay with me, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. But Ekundayo could barely hear her. His vision was fading, and the warmth of the light that had once filled him was now cold, distant. He had saved the village, defeated the darkness, but at what cost? He had given everything, and now there was nothing left. Mother, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry. I couldn't save. Before he could finish, the darkness that had been banished returned, not as an enemy, but as a gentle, welcoming embrace. Ekundayo closed his eyes, surrendering to it, knowing that he had done all he could. The last thing he heard was his mother's voice, calling his name, and then there was only silence. The village of Akanni was quiet in the days that followed. The sun shone brightly, the trees rustled softly in the breeze, and the birds sang their morning songs, but there was a heavy, unspoken sorrow that hung over the village like a cloud. The villagers mourned the loss of Ekundayo, the boy who had fought so bravely to protect them from the darkness. He had given everything to save them, and now he was gone, his life extinguished by the very light that had saved them. Akanni was inconsolable, her heart shattered by the loss of her son. She spent her days in the small hut they had shared, surrounded by the memories of Ekundayo. The villagers visited her often, bringing food and offering their condolences, but nothing could fill the void left by her son's sacrifice. Baba Adisa took on the heavy burden of leading the village through its grief. He spoke to the villagers about Ekundayo's bravery, about the boy who had faced unimaginable darkness and had given his life to protect them all. But even as he spoke, the elder could not shake the deep sadness that weighed on his heart. He had seen many things in his long life, but the loss of Ekundayo, someone he had come to love like a son, was a wound that would never fully heal. The village tried to move on, to rebuild and find peace in the aftermath of the darkness. But the shadow of what had happened lingered in the hearts of the people. They had been saved, but the cost was too great, and they struggled to find joy in the world that Ekundayo had fought so hard to preserve. But as time passed, strange things began to happen in Akanni. It started with whispers, faint, indistinct voices that could be heard in the dead of night, carrying on the wind like a forgotten song. The villagers dismissed them at first, thinking they were just the echoes of their own grief. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they could no longer be ignored. Akanni was the first to notice the changes. She would wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, certain that she had heard her son's voice calling out to her. She would rush outside, searching the darkness for any sign of him, but there was nothing, only the cold wind and the rustling of the trees. Yet, the feeling persisted, the sensation that Ekundayo was still with her, somewhere just beyond the veil of the living. The other villagers began to experience similar things, shadows moving in the corners of their vision, fleeting glimpses of Ekundayo's familiar figure disappearing around a corner, the sound of his voice whispering their names. The village was on edge, the atmosphere thick with a sense of unease. Then, one night, something happened that shook the village to its core. Akanni awoke to the sound of someone softly calling her name. It was a voice she knew all too well, Ekundayo's voice, clear and unmistakable. Her heart leaped in her chest as she scrambled out of bed, rushing toward the source of the sound. It was coming from outside, from the forest that bordered the village. Without hesitation, Akanni ran into the forest, her bare feet barely feeling the cold earth beneath them. The trees loomed overhead, their branches forming a dark canopy, but she didn't care. All that mattered was the voice of her son, calling out to her. "Mother," the voice whispered, leading her deeper into the forest. "I'm here. I need you." Akanni's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and hope. Could it really be him? Had her son somehow returned to her? She pushed through the underbrush, her breath coming in ragged gusts, until she reached a small clearing. And there, standing in the center of the clearing, was Ekundayo. Akanni's breath caught in her throat. It was him, her son, alive and whole, standing before her with a sad, gentle smile on his face. She rushed toward him, tears streaming down her cheeks, but as she drew closer, she noticed something was wrong. Ekundayo's eyes, those bright, lively eyes that she had loved so much, were different. They were dark, empty, void of the light that had once filled them. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and there was an unnatural stillness to him, as if he were not truly alive. "Mother," Ekundayo said softly, his voice devoid of emotion. "I'm here now. You don't have to cry anymore." Akanni's heart ached with a mixture of love and horror. Ekundayo, is it really you? She whispered, her voice trembling. Ekundayo nodded slowly, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Yes, mother. I've come back to you. But I'm different now. Akanni took a step back, her mind racing. Something was terribly wrong. This wasn't her son, not really. It was as if the shadow that Ekundayo had fought had taken something from him, something essential, and now he was a hollow version of the boy she had known. Ekundayo, what happened to you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ekundayo's smile faded, and his expression grew distant. I fought the darkness, mother. I fought it for you, for the village. But when I did, it took something from me. It took my soul. Akanni's blood ran cold. No, this can't be true. Ekundayo's gaze locked onto hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something dark in his eyes, something that sent a chill through her entire being. I'm not the same, mother. The darkness is a part of me now, and it's growing. It's hungry. Akanni staggered back, her hands trembling. Ekundayo, no, please, we can fix this. We can help you. But Ekundayo's expression hardened, and the darkness in his eyes seemed to spread, consuming the last remnants of light. No one can help me, mother. The darkness wants more. It's not satisfied with me, it wants the village, it wants everyone. Akanni's heart shattered as she realized the horrifying truth. The darkness that Ekundayo had fought so hard to banish had not been destroyed, it had only been transferred to him, and now it was spreading, corrupting everything it touched. She turned and ran back toward the village, her mind consumed with terror. She had to warn them, had to tell Baba Adisa, had to save the village before it was too late. But as she reached the edge of the forest, she heard Ekundayo's voice behind her, cold and empty. It's too late, mother. The darkness is already here. Akanni's scream echoed through the night as the shadows closed in around her, engulfing her in their cold embrace. Has Ekundayo truly become one with the darkness? Is Akanni going to reach the village and warn them about the approaching darkness? You will find out in the next episode.